Hello. Hi, my name is Charlotte. I'm just very quickly jumping on the mic on behalf of the Explorers Club 50 program. Each year, the Explorers Club recognizes 50 people who are doing really remarkable work around the world, changing the world that the world needs to know about. Our EC50 honorees are doing amazing work to promote science and exploration around the world, working across all fields and disciplines, connecting communities, and telling really important stories. David, our presenter today, is a member of the class of 2023. He's in this book, and I'm so happy that he's here to share his work with all of you today. And after the program, after you learn about David's work, you can read more about his work and everyone else's at 50.explorers.org. And that's all from me, so I'd like to introduce Elizabeth up now, and thank you all so much for being here.
Hi, everyone. I am Elizabeth Cronin, and I am the Robert B. Menschel Photography Curator at the New York Public Library. And I recently did an exhibition on the Arctic and how it's been perceived over the last 500 years at the library. So I was asked to introduce David today, and I think that I'm really honored to. So David Borish is a social science researcher and a visual artist who uses documentary film to co-explore and communicate an array of environmental, social, and health issues in collaboration with underrepresented communities. As an award-winning filmmaker who has a PhD in public health and international development, his visual work is grounded in evidence-based research. David has worked with wildlife co-management boards across the Canadian Arctic to co-create visual media about indigenous knowledge of species like polar bears, caribou, and beluga. He has also worked with indigenous communities on socio-ecological film projects in Uganda, Kenya, Nepal, Malaysia, Peru, and other parts of the world. He currently manages Cloudberry Connections, a company dedicated to environmental communications, and also lectures at the University of California, San Diego. David is a part of the Explorers Club annual 50 People Changing the World, class of 2023, which we just heard about. So it's my pleasure to introduce David. Thank you.
All right. Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for being here. This is great to see, such a great crowd. And big thank you to the Explorers Club for just facilitating this event. In particular, Charlotte and Felix, really appreciate all your help in getting this together. I'm really excited to be talking about a project today called Nanuk Narratives, which is all about sharing the voices of the people that are living alongside polar bears in different parts of the Arctic. And before getting into more about the project and myself, I just want to say that this project is really a collaboration between a variety of different people across the Arctic and other parts of Canada, in particular different Inuit knowledge holders, as well as researchers, Western knowledge holders, and a whole diverse group of people. So obviously they couldn't be here today, but I have the privilege of speaking on behalf of this pretty unique team that I've been fortunate to be part of. So just a little bit more about myself. So really my work focuses on the intersection of the social sciences and wildlife conservation, and really trying to document and highlight local knowledge, indigenous knowledge relating to ecological change and various species around the world. And the technique that I use is using documentary film as a way to document and share this knowledge. And I use film in kind of the more traditional sense of storytelling and communication, but really I see film as a method of bringing diverse people together to co-create knowledge about the environment. And so, as mentioned, I'm now running a company that's focused on working with Indigenous knowledge holders to share and analyze and communicate their knowledge about a range of different ecological and social issues. But this is really my core interest is using film for these purposes. And it's kind of fun being here again because literally 2 years ago, almost to the day, I was standing up here just introducing myself as part of the Explorers Club 50. And so just have a total privilege to be part of this group. An incredible cohort of people doing a whole range of different things on the front lines of science and conservation, storytelling, people working in space, underwater, all over the place. So it's a really cool group and a really cool initiative that the Explorers Club has been able to help run and facilitate. So definitely privileged to be part of this, but also if you ever get a chance to meet more people that are part of this cohort doing this kind of work, it's really, it's a special group. So in terms of a bit more about what I try to focus on when we think about wildlife conservation, when we think about ecological change, climate change, there's this really big focus on preservation and protection of natural places, which is hugely important. But myself and my team, we very much focus on this mindset of how preservation is not just about the natural world, but the preservation is also completely intertwined with local cultures and knowledge systems. And those two things need to work together for sustainable ecological conservation. And that is largely in part because a lot of local groups, communities, cultures, in particular indigenous peoples, have just developed these incredible knowledge systems about local environments through generations of hunting, fishing, trapping, and just living within different places around the world, in particular in the Arctic. And so when we're thinking about conservation, it's very much in line with this kind of social, cultural conservation as well. But one of the big challenges is that a lot of indigenous voices in particular are not heard, they're not recognized when it comes to conservation and wildlife management, to environmental preservation in general. Actually, many indigenous communities are among the least represented when it comes to making decisions about the environment and who gets to use it and in what context. And this is just a really big gap, I think, in a lot of cases, because as mentioned, some of these groups of people are the ones on the front lines of these natural locations. And so when their knowledge isn't recognized, there's both ethical implications for those communities, but also practical implications for broader conservation movements. So I've been fortunate to be able to work with groups in different parts of the world, in Africa, Asia, South America, trying to amplify indigenous perspectives. But today what I'm going to be really focusing on is my work with Inuit in the Arctic and subarctic regions in primarily Canada, but also elsewhere. And I've been really lucky to do so. I personally, I'm from Canada, and there's a lot of people that think that this is what typical Canada looks like. This is definitely not the case. I've been super lucky to do this, but before getting into this line of work, I had no experience in the Arctic. I'm originally from Ottawa, the nation's capital, and as you can see from this, most Canadians live right on that southern part of the country, and really to Inuit, we're considered Southerners. I'm a Southern guy when I'm working with these people. This was always interesting for me to see because so much of the population is just straddling that southern border, but there's that whole other part of Canada that even a lot of Canadians don't really know about or learn a whole lot about. But there's another map that is really important in the work that I do, and that is showing Inuit-Nunangat. So this is the Arctic region of Canada that are essentially the Inuit homelands. That's loosely what it translates to. And so there's 4 recognized Inuit homelands. Inuvialuit in the far west, Nunavut, which maybe some of you have heard of, Nunavik, the northern portion of Quebec, and then Nunatsiavut, which is in the far east. And Nunatsiavut is really where I got my start. When I was doing my PhD, I was focusing on a particular context around caribou and that relationship between Inuit and caribou. And this was all in the context of rapid caribou population declines, a total hunting ban on caribou, and this was causing a lot of effects on Inuit themselves. And so lots of research, lots of people were doing studies on, why are the caribou declining? What are the factors playing into it? Where my work was very much focused on what are the implications of the loss of caribou for the people who live alongside caribou. So exploring the social, mental health, emotional, cultural dimensions of the loss of this animal and what that means for people. And so this work was really the kind of foundations from both a methodological stance, but also just the relationships forming to create both video as well as research outputs relating to Inuit knowledge of a species. And so I did this for a number of years, but kind of graduated and moved up the food chain to now working on a project about polar bears. And this project, which I'm going to be sharing more about today, is called Nanuk Narratives. And Nanuk means polar bear. There's different ways of saying it in different dialects, different regions. But yeah, broadly, this is supposed to mean polar bear narratives. Now, before I go further into this project, just want to provide a bit of context around polar bears in the Arctic. And there's not one polar bear population around the world. There's actually 20 recognized polar bear subpopulations. And these are, loose borders. It's not like polar bears don't cross these. They do. They're they move around a lot. But the idea is that, generally speaking, polar bears that are born within these specific subpopulation regions, they typically spend most of their life there, or they come back there at a certain point. And so within each of these different subpopulation regions, there's a whole range of different geographies, landscapes, access to seals and other wildlife, and bears across these different regions have different behaviors and adaptations too. And so while polar bears might all look similar in a certain way, they also have a range of adaptations depending on where in the Arctic or subarctic they are. And there's this narrative around the world really that polar bears are all declining because of climate change and the loss of ice. And for me, at least, this was just that dominant idea that, we need to protect the polar bears, we need to save them, and they were so linked to this climate movement. But as I got further into doing this work, I realized that there's actually a lot more nuance to that. Because there's all these different regions, these subpopulation regions are changing in different ways. The polar bear subpopulations are also, changing, and they have their own population trends. And in some cases, there are subpopulations that are recognized to be declining, such as that red area, which is the Western Hudson's Bay population. And if any of you have heard of Churchill, Manitoba, the polar bear capital of the world as it's known, this is where that population is. And, it's relatively serious. I think, there has to be management decisions and policies specific to a declining population. But as you can see from this map, there's also other populations that are stable, in some cases, some that are increasing as well. So it's not this, wide-scale doom and gloom story for all polar bears around the world. The other thing from at least this map you can kind of get a sense of is there's a lot of populations that are considered data deficient, and really it's just hard to know what's going on with polar bear populations because these regions are so vast, they're so difficult to get to, it's so expensive to do surveys. And so there's just a lot of information from a Western science perspective that we just don't know about. This one stat shared by the IUCN Polar Bear Specialist Group, I thought was important to share, that about 80% of polar bear subpopulations do not have this long-term population data, at least from a Western science perspective. So again, just a lot of area to learn more about bears. And so I'm sharing this context because I think it's important to recognize this when thinking about local knowledge and local communities that live alongside bears and how important they are for thinking about conservation and the knowledge of these animals and an Arctic environment in general. As mentioned, these are people that have generations and generations of knowledge of not just individual species, but ice patterns and changes in the landscape more broadly. And so it is fundamental that we leverage this knowledge for the practicality of supporting polar bears moving forward, but also in understanding these people's relationships with polar bears. And a lot of these communities, they use polar bear. They hunt bears for clothing, for food, for cultural reasons. And so there's a lot of interconnections between the people that live with polar bears and the future, I think, of this species moving forward. And so that's kind of the bigger picture context. But myself and my team focused on one specific polar bear subpopulation called the Davis Strait population. And this was kind of an interesting population because it crosses so many different jurisdictions and territories, from Newfoundland and Labrador in the south to Nunavut, Quebec in the west, Nunavut in the north, and then Greenland in the north eastern part. And so there's just a whole lot of different people that are connected to potentially the same bears. But what makes this challenging is that each of these regions have their own perspectives and priorities when it comes to managing polar bears. They have different ideas on how to hunt, how many to hunt, how to think about the future of this species. And so it's within this context that the wildlife co-management boards in these regions came together to form a project that was going to be all about trying to bring people together to think about polar bear conservation in new ways. And so I had been part of this project from the beginning. It started about 4 years ago or so. And it was just this really cool opportunity of bringing together Inuit knowledge holders, hunters, wildlife biologists, legal experts, public health experts, just a range of people into the same room. And when we first started with this project, we actually didn't even have like a specific goal. We just brought people together into the same room when we're like, okay, let's talk about polar bears and see where this goes. And after months of these mainly online Zoom conversations, we landed on this one kind of area of focus, that being to make Inuit knowledge more accessible and influential when it comes to polar bear conservation. And again, this is in that context that a lot of Inuit voices are just not recognized. They're not heard when it comes to thinking about this species. And so once we came to that overarching goal, we then needed to think, okay, how are we actually going to do this? And that's where this idea of documentary film came into play, where the idea is we would create a series of short educational videos, short as in 5 to 8 minutes long, that are just snippets of this broader relationship between these people and this animal. And so over the years, we've been able to work on a range of different videos, from how Inuit track and observe bears, safety with human bear conflicts, how to cook and eat polar bears and skin bears, observations that people are seeing on the land, elder knowledge of bears, a whole range of things. And we're going to be watching a few of these a little bit later. So yeah, just a lot of different thinking came into play in terms of what specifically to focus on when it comes to sharing this relationship with these people and these animals. But a really big part of this work too was the process of actually working with communities to tell their stories. And I did a lot of the filming myself, but as much as possible, we tried to work with local filmmakers. We tried to work with emerging filmmakers to document in ways that align with their specific community needs and priorities. And so this is something that we really strive to do from this kind of community-based filmmaking approach. And so we were able to talk with people across 8 different communities in the Davis Strait Range. So we talked with 3 in Nunavut, 2 in Nunatsiavut, 2 in Nunavut, and 1 in Nuuk, and talked with about 40 people across this range, just trying to listen to stories about polar bears. And also within these communities, there was this process of trying to get community feedback so that we weren't just releasing films without input from a broad range of people. And this is in part within the context that a lot of journalism, a lot of filmmakers have gone in and told stories with good intentions, but release the content, and it actually backfires on these communities because it's not told in ways that align with their kind of vision and values. And so it extends the filmmaking process by quite a lot, but we feel this is the way to go in terms of getting input and the stories to be as accurate as possible. And that includes bringing it to schools, getting input from youth to see what they think. And so, we were able to create a range of different videos. And the first one that I want to share with you is about the different observations that people have been starting to see relating to polar bear adaptations. So hopefully this works.
In a changing Arctic, hearing from Inuit is essential. We are stewards of the land, backed by modern-day laws. We see firsthand how the environment is changing and how the animals are responding. This is a series of videos about the people who have coexisted with polar bears for thousands of years, showcasing our regional differences and unique perspectives. This is Nanuk Narratives.
People get focused on that one picture of that one sick or one bear that's not in very good health, and that gets publicized all across the world, and that's the perception that the rest of the bear population is like that entirely. Yes, without a doubt, there are some subpopulation bears, some places in the world that's in the decline, and there's concern for some of those subpopulations, but what we're seeing in the Davis Strait population, and we're seeing a very healthy subpopulation of bears, and our population of the Davis Strait polar bears are holding their own. If anything, it's growing. Moms with 2 and 3 cubs, healthy juveniles, very, very healthy females, very big males. So that there is all connecting to that. We have a healthy population.
There's a lot of effects to climate change. Different things, the land, the water, the temperature, permafrost melting. But as northern people, we're very adaptable. You still have some people alive today who were born in igloos and now are settled into communities. And that just goes to show how Inuit can adapt so fast. Which is the same thing with the polar bears. In the sea ice season getting shorter, they have been able to adapt.
The bears, not all of them are dying from hunger. Some of them are adapting, like they can hunt seals in the summertime too. Some of them are doing pretty well, because when we see some, most of the time, they're nice and fat.
Polar bears, when they're hungry, they will eat anything. They will eat seaweed, they will eat clams. I have actually witnessed a polar bear hunt caribou.
nahiugunnatuni manninilluuni mitiumanni alami nirajabinutsuti taima mitihalluangittualuyaasuungularmiyu tamanna.
You know, the bears are cleaning out eider duck colonies, eating all their eggs, you know, which wasn't as bad as I can remember.
Alla nuotsijualutsuti ihalunni nuotsi pihattatamini nuotsijualtuinen takusiummiyugu nihitsamini nuotsijualummi ihalumni.
We only used to see black bears in the river in the fall. Now, further north from here, we're seeing more and more polar bears fishing for char. They're wading like a grizzly bear. That they never did that before, but they're actually catching fish and putting them away for later use. That's what we're witnessing now.
And remember that we have several species of seals in Inuit-Nunavut that have their babies on the rocks and on the islands and the shoals. So there's 8 or 10 species of seals that Nanuk can harvest and catch for his food source. It doesn't necessarily have to be on the surface of the ice or on an ice floe.
They're very capable of getting food whenever they want. I've seen polar bears hunting in the ocean and catching seals, like not on a pan of ice, not sneak attacking it, like chasing down a seal and catching it. They're proficient at killing walruses, and they're proficient at hunting belugas and narwhal.
Yeah, the predators of the north, they'll try to catch anything, even humans.
You know, listen to the Inuit and you'll find out the big picture, not just that skinny bear on social media or the internet you see. That's not the case.
All right. So, yeah, hopefully that gave you a sense of the kind of style and approach of this video series. Short videos that are meant to just share little glimpses into one aspect of Inuit knowledge or Inuit relationships with polar bears. What I want to do now is share a bit more about the process of actually documenting polar bears, and in particular documenting Inuit hunting processes of going on these polar bear hunts. And I went on 3 specific ones in Inukjuak, in Kengksuludjuak, and in Rigolet, and they were all very different experiences. So I hope to just share a bit about these different experiences. But before doing that, I just want to say that since I've gone on these trips, I've definitely struggled with this idea of hunting a polar bear. I myself am not a hunter, and although I've been documenting and sharing, with Inuit, it still is sometimes challenging for myself to wrap my head around, why are we hunting this beautiful species that is so tied to so many movements and symbolism around the world. And so, but as I learned more and worked with these communities, the importance for clothing, for living up in these locations, for food and for other reasons, really stands out. And so just want to say it's okay if you might not be used to this kind of thing, and in the next video we're going to watch, there might be some scenes that are maybe you might not be comfortable with, but hopefully you can keep an open mind to kind of their approach in living with polar bears. But yeah, I want to start off by talking a bit about my experience in Inukjuak. And this was the very first really polar bear trip that we went on at the very start of this project. And I had been working up in the Arctic for a while, but for whatever reason, going up to this community just hit me really hard, because it was -40 Fahrenheit, and we were supposed to spend a full week out on the land tracking polar bears. And as much as I tried to be prepared for that, it was very difficult. But it's funny because I got into the community and I was freezing after 5 minutes of being outside, but kids were just playing outside like it was no big deal. And it was so cold that the roads were actually frozen. And so kids were just skating and playing hockey right in the community on these roads. And they were just having the best time. And for me to be able to spend 5, maybe 10 minutes before having to go inside just showed, very much that I was a Southerner in this context. So I, had to really bundle up, and I pretty much tripled my size. And I actually came in with, this nice Canada Goose jacket, thinking I was going to be warm enough. But these hunters that I was with, they just laughed at me. They were like, this is not going to be warm enough. So I had to wear a full parka over top of my Canada Goose, along with all these other layers. And it really was, just absolutely freezing out there. And it's one thing to go out for a short amount of time, but to be on the back of a skidoo with the wind coming at you, like, it was probably the hardest physical thing I've ever done in my life. And yet these hunters, they were thriving. They were so excited for it to be this cold, because things have been warming in the Arctic, and so they haven't had these kind of cold spells. So they were just having the best time. And of course, with their polar bear snow pants, some of them were staying extra warm. So this is, what a typical day would be like. We would go out for, 10 hours or so trying to track polar bears. And it was beautiful. But from a filming perspective, this is pretty much what most of it was like. It was bumpy. Most of the footage was out of focus. I could only really take my hands out of my gloves for like 30 seconds at a time. So the vast majority of the footage that I collected looked like that, which makes it really difficult to film in these environments. But you do what you can and document whatever you can in a kind of a stable way. But you can see, as we're getting out on the land here, we have what they call hummatiks, these sleds that these skidoos are pulling. And we brought as much as we could out on our trip out on the land, but we couldn't bring everything from town. And so we had to worry about things like water and food and shelter. And so this was one way of collecting water. They knew some of these freshwater locations on these islands. So they would chop away at the ice, and then we would essentially bring back these chunks of ice back to our cabin to be able to use as drinking water for the next few days. So that was on the water side. When it comes to food, people up in the north, they really, really love what they call country food. Food from the land, primarily animals, partridges, seals, caribou, polar bear, walrus. And this was the main reason why we went out, was to go and hunt. And in this case, they were hunting for seals. And you'll see later in the video a bit more about this, but it's incredible where you have literally a completely frozen sea ice, and there's no even big breathing holes. It's just these tiny little holes for the seals to be able to breathe out of. And so the hunters would just wait there until a seal, they can't even see the full seal, it's just their nose would pop up or some kind of air would come up. And so after we got a seal, pretty much right away, cut it up, and it was a feast. Just started eating the seal right there while it was still warm. They actually cleared part of the snow to put the meat on the salt water, because that made the meat taste better. And whatever wasn't eaten in this moment was brought back to the community to give out to elders and others that can't go hunting themselves. And then from a shelter side, we didn't actually stay here, but this is a big igloo for cultural purposes.
For a duck who has puppies. Fireplace. In the freezer. And that's the main house.
So this was not a typical thing. This is obviously a really, really big igloo. This was made outside of the community so that they could teach youth on how to properly create these kind of igloos. But this is the kind of thing that hunters would try to be able to make, because if you get stuck on the land, if there's a snowstorm, you need to be able to make shelter for yourself. So this was still a really important part of their culture and survival. But these are the kind of cabins that we would stay in, and just, you know, these tiny shacks, essentially, enough room to just lay down and sleep in, and sleeping with a whole bunch of other men on these hunting trips, and you just try to stay as warm as you can. And at the end of the day, this is typically what my camera would look like. And the first time this happened, I was totally freaking out because I thought I just, you know, lost the camera, but luckily it survived. And yeah, it was just, you know, from all the snow blowing. There were times where, you know, my play button would freeze, so I couldn't actually record anymore. So just really difficult conditions to actually film in. But yeah, hopefully this gives you a sense of what this specific trip in Inukjuak was like. And I'm just gonna share this next video about this trip.
By modern day laws, we see firsthand how the environment is changing and how the animals are responding. This is a series of videos about the people who have coexisted with polar bears for thousands of years, showcasing our regional differences and unique perspectives. This is Nanuk Narratives.
Ben Olsen.
Narok may pinelok kay Dagotsi.
Nagasin mo ako ito.
Yun ko lang.
Nakumit. Mamaktar.
All right. So yeah, hopefully that gave you a little sense into, what it's like to go on a polar bear hunt, go on a seal hunt, and the process behind it, and a freezing cold southerner going up there too. So the next trip that I want to share just briefly about was in Rigolet, and this was actually the complete opposite of what we were experiencing in Nukjuak. Essentially, we were trying to go out and look for polar bears, but the conditions were so unseasonably warm that we really just couldn't get out onto the land at all. And we tried for multiple days, but this was what it was like actually in early March, right around this time about 2 years ago. And it was terrible. We couldn't get out and do anything, and so we ended up going a little bit out onto the land and tried to come back, and it almost felt like we were skidooing across the lake rather than skidooing. The lake was already melting, and I personally was quite scared. The hunters had already, they had experience with this kind of conditions, but you don't want to be having a skidoo go through the ice in the middle of the lake. So I bring this experience up mainly because this is actually a bit more typical in certain parts of the Arctic and subarctic, and proving really, really challenging for a lot of people, communities, hunters, to be able to go out and not just do what they have traditionally always done, but to gather food and resources and wood and things like that. It is increasingly difficult in a warming Arctic. And in this specific community, Rigolet, just this year they have pretty much no snow or very little snow, and so they can't even go out on skidoos. And that, I don't know if that's ever happened, or at least within recent memory. So this is unfortunately a reality that is affecting both people and bears. And the final community I want to talk about is my experience in Kangaksulujuak. And so after the Inuit-led trip, which was freezing cold, the Rigolet trip that was not cold enough, we went out on this polar bear trip, and the conditions were perfect. It was not too cold, the snow was there, the traveling conditions were really, really good. And so we had kind of big hopes for this trip in terms of just the experience. And as we're going out, it's a full day trip to get out to the cabins that we were staying in. Some of the hunters were telling me this story about a recent bear break-in into one of the cabins where there were a bunch of men on the inside of the cabin pushing against the door, and the bear was on the outside trying to get into the cabin. And they were saying how the bear had broken into the window and all that. So just pretty scary stuff. And I was intrigued, but then I realized once we got to the cabin we were staying at that this was the exact same cabin, which they didn't tell me. So it was kind of a freaky experience because the cabin was completely falling apart because of these bears. The window had been broken into. There were scratches all over the place. And the door, as you can see there, they actually had to change the door because it opened inwards, and they decided that's actually a really bad form when bears can push in. So they switched it around so the door could be open, but then the bears started to use their claws to, try to break in. So that's why it's kind of ruined there. And this is a cabin in the middle of this very kind of dense area of polar bears. So they didn't seem too concerned, but I thought, at least, I'm surrounded by a bunch of hunters, they'll sleep with their guns and we'll have a good lock and all that, so we should be fine. But then they told me that the lock actually was broken by a bear. So this is their fix instead. Literally just a rope. A rope keeping us between, us and the bear. So at this point, I think they could tell that I was getting a little bit antsy because I had never been in a cabin this, unsafe before. But they said, don't worry because, in the middle of the night, you'll, if there is a bear outside, you'll hear the footsteps. You'll hear it, and then we'll wake up. We all have guns. We'll be protected. So everyone goes to sleep, and I'm just up trying to listen to footsteps. But the problem is that I was in a cabin with a bunch of older men. So this is what I heard all night. And I'm trying to listen to polar bear footsteps outside in between these snores. So honestly, I didn't sleep that night at all. But we made it. There were no polar bears that came actually any of the nights, so we were really lucky about that. But this is, what a typical day in the morning would look like. We would wake up, kind of get things prepared, and go out, trying to find polar bears for another day or so. And this was overall like a really incredible experience. Again, the conditions were really great. Amazing to be in this other community that had, slightly different knowledge than the others. And one of the main videos that came out of this piece was a video focused on human-bear encounters and the increasing danger of living in these places with polar bears either changing in populations and or their behaviors changing as well. So hopefully this next video gives you a little sense.
In a changing Arctic, hearing from Inuit is essential. We are stewards of the land, backed by modern-day laws. We see firsthand how the environment is changing and how the animals are responding. This is a series of videos about the people who have coexisted with polar bears for thousands of years, showcasing our regional differences and unique perspectives. This is Nanuk Narratives.
Right now we are trying to build a lot of cabins in our hunting grounds. We used to put a tent, now it's too dangerous to be in a tent. The tent would be just torn from the polar bears. That's the number one predator of the north.
Even stock, they never used to stalk a human.
The bear was pushing the door, trying to get in the cabin, but there was a bunch of guys that pushed against the polar bear.
Never know what could happen to a polar bear and a person when they're too close to each other. When we were growing up, we used to play outside, we used to walk far, not caring about seeing polar bear. But when I got to be a teenager, we start seeing them.
it has really increased in our region. Let's say we go out hunting on a speedboat in the fall time. Everywhere you look, you're able to see polar bear, old, young, mother with cubs.
Just from here to Killinnick, that's 150 miles north. I'll just drive along the coast and I count and I see 60. So there's lots I can tell you.
I think they're getting used to interacting with the humans. They're more fearless about the noise.
Yours, hey, your seat, tackle yours. Hey, hey, hey!
Even with gunshot, sometimes we see polar bear coming towards you. It used to be opposite. Any noise that was made, like they used to run separate. Like when we hunt, we usually kill seals. I guess they're learning that too, like the behavior. Hear a gunshot, menu is ready. Yeah. The most disturbing for me is the choppers. They're getting the polar bears less fearing humans. With the big noise that's going around them, they're more a bit afraid of that now than encountering with a human. That's why we see more and more polar bear attacks.
Yes, I have quite a few close calls with the polar bears. My son and his uncle went caribou hunting. They went over the ridge, and I was at the boat, and I look at the bear following them, and they cannot see us. We had that walkie-talkie, and son, there's a polar bear coming on your way. And sure enough, when they looked back, there was a polar bear going right at them. When they locked into a person, they will not stop. So we had to sometimes had to kill them in order to, is it him or us, kind of thing.
I was following my parents. They were hunting, so there was other guys that stayed at the cabin too. There was a bunch of caribou meat outside. The bear was pushing the door, trying to get in the cabin. So there was a bunch of guys that pushed against the polar bear, and luckily there was many people that pushed. We had no rifle inside in the cabin. The polar bear luckily went towards the caribou meat, and one of the guys was able to reach the rifle, and the polar bear started coming back running, and luckily it was shot. If we were only like 3 of us in the cabin, me and my parents, I'm pretty sure we would have been attacked.
One polar bear approaching me in a boat, diving a little bit, show up, dive a bit, hiding the nose and very small eyes. Had to do like warning shot beside. No fear, it keep coming. So I had to kill it in the water.
My father's house is in the corner of the town over there, the blue house. The polar bear came into town and got too curious, and it was just beside my father's house, too close, where children are playing outside. For that main reason, the people from here decided to shoot it right away before it comes back again.
right, so that was the last video that I wanted to share today, but yeah, I really hope that gave you a sense of what it's like, filming in some of these communities and the safety concerns of living alongside polar bears as well. And just the last kind of experience I want to share before we wrap up here is a completely different experience of filming polar bears that I actually have the Explorers Club to thank for. Last summer, I had the opportunity to join on a ship that was going across the Northwest Passage to go and film polar bears. It was through a company called Ponant. And after going through the extreme cold, the safety challenges of living in or staying in a cabin with polar bears in the areas, it was really nice to be on this pretty luxurious ship. So it really felt like a treat from not only an experience side, but just from a filming side as well. And we did this, really incredible month-long journey across a huge chunk of the Arctic, going through 8 different polar bear subpopulation ranges, leaving from Reykjavik, Iceland, and ending in Nome, Alaska. As we were going through the Northwest Passage, I had these expectations that, us being on an icebreaker, we were going to be going through lots and lots of ice. It was going to be difficult to navigate. But it was interesting that most of the Northwest Passage looked like this. In fact, there was no ice in the Northwest Passage. We had to go further north than we had planned to get into the ice. So this is, I think, symbolic of what's happening in a changing Arctic. But once we did get up into the ice, this is what it looked like. It was incredible to be on the ship that could just plow through such dense ice. And of course, for me, the main reason was to try to get a glimpse of polar bears, because these other trips, being on skidoo on land, I saw a handful of polar bears across 3 different trips. So it's very difficult to actually have good encounters. But going on this ship, it was incredible how many bears we saw. I took little coordinates of every time we saw a bear, and we ended up seeing 50 over the course of a month. And so these are the bears that we saw. And what was, to me, most surprising was that, we headed right out into the middle of the Arctic Ocean, and there were these bears that were so far away from land. And a lot of Inuit would say this too. There are some bears they almost call sea bears. They don't really go on land at all. They just live almost their entire lives out in the ocean on the ice. And so really just it shows how adaptable and how incredible these species really are. And so we were able to see a lot of bears, but not just seeing bears, but a whole range of different behaviors and things that they were doing, from hunting seals, fat bears, bears with cubs. We got really, really lucky, and this is a lot of the footage that was used in the Nanuk Narratives series. And this was my balcony from my room, and just to walk outside rather than being in a cabin and seeing a polar bear like this, it was a real treat. And one of the last things I want to say is that, I was out there also sharing more work about Nanuk Narratives and presenting to some of the passengers. And there was this moment where, similar to this presentation, I was about to start and talk about bears, and then we got this announcement, to let all the passengers know that there were polar bears outside. So everyone had to leave my talk about polar bears to go see polar bears. And so that's me in a dress shirt, because we just ran out altogether. So anyways, it was a very lucky experience, and thank you to the Explorers Club for making that connection. And these are just a few of the last shots to show you of these bears that we saw up north. So with that, thank you very much, everyone, for listening to this. I hope you learned something about polar bears, and appreciate it. Thank you. And yeah, I guess we have some time for questions. Just quickly, if you're interested in watching more of Nanuk Narratives, you can visit our website and feel free to reach out to me anytime.
Thank you so much. That was incredible. I just have this question. What does seal meat and polar bear meat taste like, if you could share? And then also the really cool underwater footage that you got of the seal. How did that happen?
Yeah, so in terms of the meat, seal is very irony. It's very, very rich and very rich in iron, so an incredibly dark meat. So they say when you eat seal, especially for the first time, you can expect things to be darker on the other end. So that was something I was not totally prepared for, but it tastes good. I had it mainly roasted, but also raw in that moment too. But yeah, it's a good meat. And polar bear, I only had a little bit of it, but it kind of tastes like seal because they eat a lot of seal. So, but also very, very rich in iron. Actually, polar bear meat is dangerous if you eat it raw. Almost all the other foods in the Arctic you can eat raw, but polar bears you really need to cook for like hours and hours. I think minimum like 5 to 6 hours. Because there's a chance of getting trichinella from polar bear meat. That and walrus meat, you can get trichinella. So they cook polar bear for a very long time. And yeah, the underwater shots, those are actually some of the very few shots that we just bought from someone else. So I wasn't underwater for those. Yeah.
I was wondering if you could say more about what the different laws are that are governing Inuit harvesting and hunting.
Yeah, for sure. So I can speak maybe specifically to the Davis Strait region. So each region is governed by different Inuit laws, and it's managed by what we call co-management boards in Canada. So it's these wildlife management boards that bring together Indigenous knowledge as well as Western science. And these boards make decisions around what people can do in terms of harvesting certain species. And so they very much differ depending on the region. In Labrador, there's only 12 bears that can be hunted every year, and that's only for Inuit. In Nunavut, it's somewhere closer to 60 or so. That's the quota. And to my knowledge, it hasn't been filled in recent years, so people just aren't hunting that many. And in Nunavik, in northern Quebec, there's actually no quota at all. So technically, Inuit could go out and hunt what they want, but they adhere to their own kind of traditional ways of managing bears. So those are examples of 3 different ways. In other regions of Canada, it will likely be different, but yeah, that gives you a little taste.
Hi, I just wanted to thank you for sharing. This was actually an excellent experience. This might be a more off the beat question, but during your time out on the ice and during your hunts, were you gifted anything to bring back with you, like as a souvenir to remember your time out there?
Yeah, I've been gifted kind of random things. I've been gifted polar bear claws, some fur, a lot of, actually not very much in terms of polar bear specific outside of those claws, but I've got sealskin mitts and things like that. But yeah, I try not to bring too much back from the north, in particular because a lot of these resources and these animals are so tied to these communities. So yeah, I don't really take too much back, but usually sealskin related things. Thanks.
Hi. I just wanted to ask you what the main difference between the subspecies were. Was it morphological or was it behavioral, or what did you see?
Yeah, I can't tell you much about the details of the subpopulation differences. I know that in some cases there are genetic differences. I think a big part of it is their general ranges on where they either live their full lives or where they come back to. So that original subpopulation map, if a bear is born in a particular range, they might travel within that, they might travel a little bit out of it, but for the most part, they're gonna be in that range. So there might be a geographic aspect to it. I couldn't tell you if there were behavioral differences. That I think very much depends, not so much on subpopulations, but even just individual bears and proximity to different communities. But just related to that, based on Inuit knowledge, a lot of people say that bears are actually left-handed. So if you're ever attacked by a polar bear, you want to move to the other side of the left hand because that's the way they're going to swipe. So anyways, not related to that subpopulation, but.
Right here.
Hey, great presentation. Just had a quick question about the relationship between bears and the younger generation. So like, I feel like from your presentation, I got a sense that like bears are not really the best food source. So I'm guessing the bear hunting is mostly for tradition and like sport. How do younger generations feel about bear hunting compared to like the older generations in these communities?
Yeah, no, it's a really great question, and a big part of our work too is trying to show these videos to a younger audience. In part because there is a gap in kind of cultural understanding and place-based understanding of polar bears amongst younger generations. And to your point about how younger generations feel about it, I think the short answer is that it's just mixed. You get a lot of people that are within these communities that are anti-polar bear hunting, just because they don't feel like there's as much of a need for it anymore. In other cases, you get some younger folks that are really excited about being able to go out and I think the important thing, and this isn't polar bear specific, but going out hunting in general in the north is so connected to just all these other aspects of connection to land. And so just as an example with my work with caribou, there's this total hunting ban, but people have been advocating for the right to hunt like one caribou a year. And that's not going to feed a community, but that's going to keep that tie of going out and learning how to track caribou, learning how to understand the landscape so that when the herds do return, they'll be able to manage that properly. And so when it comes to polar bears, there isn't this staple food aspect that you would have with other animals like caribou, seal, char. But there's still this dimension of, polar bears are like the warmest clothing you could have. And they do still play a role in food security amongst an older population, especially in the context that food is just so expensive in these communities, that any kind of country food can really do a lot to support a community. And so there's a lot of younger folks that are still trying to learn these practices, but again, it's quite mixed.
Hi, thank you very much for sharing. In your presentation, you said some of the region can see steady increase of polar bear population, whereas other areas you see decline. Has there any study been done to determine what's the deciding factor of those differences? And the natural follow-up would be, for all the regions we do have the data, you see the aggregate trend as increase or decrease? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I wouldn't be able to tell you all the details on those population trends. I think that as a whole, there's this belief that polar bear populations are, if they're not declining right now, they are likely going to decline. But it's just something that we're not necessarily seeing for all of the different subpopulations right now. And part of that could be because bears are maybe adapting in different ways. Other reasons is that in terms of the factors you were asking about, the Arctic is changing in different ways. And overall there is, this decline of ice. But in some regions of the Arctic, the ice moves in different ways. In some areas, the ice moves away from land. In other areas, the ice naturally moves into land. And so, for example, in like the high Arctic, people are guessing that polar bears are going to be probably more safe there or sustained there because the ice naturally moves in, and so you probably won't have these big periods of time without ice. So that might be one factor. But also, actually going back to the point about the differences in subpopulations, There are bears that are adapted for certain regions, and the bears in kind of the more southern regions of Canada, they are more used to spending months on land because historically there would be less ice during the summers. And so there's a whole bunch of different factors that could come into play. I don't know if there's specific, lists and hierarchies of these factors, but I'll just say that it's very, very complex.
Hi, I just wanted to say thank you for telling the story from a Native perspective. When I was a teenager, my parents made me live on a Navajo reservation for a summer, just so I could have that respect for our Native people. My question comes with, what is the relationship between the Native language and the hunt and the polar bear? And are you seeing younger people learning that language, or do you feel as if it's dying?
Yeah, it's a great question. It very much depends on the region, I'd say. As an example, in Labrador, almost no one speaks Inuit-led anymore. There are, some elders that speak it. They're trying to relearn it in schools, but it's pretty much all English, and it's language and therefore, culture that has been lost. But as soon as you go into Quebec, in Nunavik, they actually have a really strong language there. And one factor that I've heard that could play into it is because in Quebec, there's been these really strong language laws to protect French language. And so I guess some of the indigenous groups also benefited from protecting their languages, decades ago as well. So I guess I'll just say that it varies depending on where you are in the Arctic, but how it plays into polar bears and relationship, there's so much nuance in language that comes with understanding the land and place-based names and understandings. So, as people lose that language, they might lose other aspects of their knowledge tied to certain species like polar bears. So I wouldn't be able to tell you the details of that, but I think it's definitely a factor from that kind of cultural side. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Just real quick, just kind of curious your favorite time with Inuits, or who your favorite Inuit was.
Yeah, in terms of a favorite time, it's hard to say. Honestly, probably one of that one trip of going out, and even though we had that scare of being in the cabin with the bears in the area, it was just. There's something amazing about being out in the Arctic in late spring because it's a winter wonderland. The conditions are so beautiful and it's not cold, and going on skidoo in a landscape where you can just go wherever you want. Like, we've done other research with these communities around the kind of emotional mental health connections to land, and a common word that comes up is freedom, and just being able to do what you want and go where you want without anyone telling you what to do. And I've gotten tastes of that, and it really is a pretty great feeling. So I'd say, along those lines of just being able to be with these people out on the land has been a special experience.
Maybe one more question? Everyone, please give one more round of applause for David. I'm sure you'll stick up if you have any more questions. Thanks for coming, and check our calendar. Please come again.
Awesome.
Okay, so this is going to be totally, again, off the beat because, I rock like that. So obviously, polar bears are large animals. So when you're hunting them, what caliber rifle round are you using to hunt a polar bear? What can bring that down that much stopping power?
Yeah, to be honest, I'm not the best one to talk about that. I've never really hunted before. I know they use like 22s and things like that, but I don't know the details of it. So yeah. Thanks for the question though. Thanks everyone.